The Great Hall of the Galactic Council had never been so quiet. 3,000 beings from across the galaxy sat in perfect silence, their eyes fixed on the massive screen at the center of the chamber. The image showed a dying world, its surface, covered in strange metal structures that moved like living things. Ambassador Cathar stood at the speaking platform, his blue skin pale with fear. His species, the Villani, were known for their calm nature. They never raised their voices. They never showed panic. But today was different. "Council members," Cathar began, his voice shaking. "This is the final transmission from our homeworld of Velen Prime." The screen flickered, and suddenly the hall was filled with the sound of screaming. The image showed massive machines, each one the size of a city, tearing apart buildings and consuming everything in their path. The machines looked ancient, covered in symbols that hurt to look at. They moved with purpose, like they had done this before, many times before. "The Devourers have awakened," Cathar continued. "After 1,000,000 years of sleep, they have returned to finish what they started." A ripple of fear went through the assembled beings. Everyone knew the stories. The Devourers were legends, nightmares from the distant past. Most people thought they were just myths told to frighten children. Council leader Vorth, a massive creature with 6 arms and stone-like skin, leaned forward. "How many worlds have fallen?" 12, Cathar replied. Velen Prime was the latest. Before that, they consumed the industrial worlds of the Krafin Empire and the garden planets of the Mirren Collective. Each world they take makes them stronger. Each victory gives them more resources to build more machines. The screen changed again, showing a star map. Red dots marked the fallen worlds, spreading like a disease across the galaxy. The pattern was clear and terrifying. The Devourers were not random destroyers. They had a plan. "Our combined fleets attacked them at the Helix Nebula," Cathar said. "We sent everything we had. 50,000 ships from 20 different species. The battle lasted 3 hours." "What happened?" someone called out from the crowd. "We lost," Cathar said simply. "Not just the battle, we lost everything. The Devourers didn't just destroy our ships. They studied them, they learned from them. They took our weapons and made them better. Our own technology was turned against us." Panic began to spread through the hall. Voices rose in different languages, all saying the same thing in different ways: fear, desperation, the realization that their greatest nightmares were real and unstoppable. Council leader Vorth raised all 6 arms for silence. "What do our military advisors recommend?" General Thax, a warrior from the proud Corlin species, stood up. His people had never lost a war in their 1,000-year history. But even he looked defeated. "Our models show that the Devourers will consume the entire galaxy within 50 years, maybe less. Every world they take makes them exponentially stronger. We cannot match their technology. We cannot match their numbers. We cannot match their experience." "There must be something," Vorth insisted. "Some weapon we haven't tried? Some strategy we haven't considered?" "There is one option," said a voice from the back of the hall. Everyone turned to look. Ambassador Jun-Ho Park sat in the section reserved for the newest council members. His species had only joined the galactic community 50 years ago. Most of the older species still considered humans to be primitive newcomers. "The humans wish to speak?" Vorth said, surprise clear in his voice. Jun-Ho stood up slowly. He was shorter than most beings in the hall, but something about him made others nervous. Maybe it was his calm expression while everyone else panicked. Maybe it was the way he seemed to find their terror interesting rather than frightening. "Earth has been monitoring the situation," Jun-Ho said. "We have studied the Devourer attacks and analyzed their methods." "And what have your studies revealed?" General Thax asked, barely hiding his doubt. "The Devourers are machines," Jun-Ho replied. "Very old machines, but still machines. They operate on logic and programming that hasn't changed in 1,000,000 years. This makes them predictable." "Predictable?" Cathar laughed bitterly. "They destroyed our entire civilization in 6 days. How is that predictable?" "Because they always do the same thing," Jun-Ho explained. They arrive, they analyze, they consume, they move on. They have never faced an enemy that adapts faster than they do. They have never faced an enemy that thinks like humans think, murmurs went through the hall. Humans had a reputation in the galaxy, and it wasn't entirely positive. They were known for their violence, their unpredictability, their disturbing ability to find creative solutions to impossible problems. Other species respected human technology, but they feared human methods. What are you suggesting? Vorth asked. Earth will help, Zhenho said simply. We will send our people to deal with the Devourer threat. Your people? General Fax scoffed. What can humans do that our combined fleets could not? Zhenho smiled, and somehow that smile made the temperature in the hall seem to drop. You sent soldiers to fight the Devourers. Earth will not send soldiers. Then what will you send? We will send humans, Zhenho replied. There is a difference. The hall fell silent again. Everyone knew that humans were dangerous, but they had always assumed it was because of their weapons or their ships. Now they were beginning to understand that the danger came from something else entirely. Something that couldn't be measured or quantified. How many ships will you send? Vorth asked. 5, Zhenho answered. 5 ships? General Fax stood up in anger. 5 ships to fight an enemy that destroyed 50,000 of ours? Yes, Zhenho said calmly. 5 ships. Each one crewed by humans who specialize in solving impossible problems. What kind of specialists? Zhenho's smile grew wider. The kind that other humans try not to think about. The kind that win wars by changing the rules. The kind that turn enemies into allies and nightmares into dreams. He paused and looked around the hall, meeting the eyes of beings from 100 different worlds. You asked for help. Earth heard your call. But understand this. When you ask humans for help, you don't get to choose how that help is delivered. You don't get to approve our methods. You don't get to understand our reasons until after we're done. And if your methods fail? Cathar asked. Then you'll die knowing that the last species in the galaxy tried everything possible to save you, Zhenho replied. But our methods won't fail. The Devourers have never faced anything like what we're about to show them. The vote was unanimous. Every species, every world, every desperate being in the hall agreed to let humanity try their mysterious solution. They had no choice. The alternative was extinction. As the council session ended and beings began to file out of the hall, many of them wondered what they had just agreed to. They had asked Earth for salvation, and Earth had accepted. But somehow, they all suspected that what was coming would change the galaxy forever. Zhenho remained in his seat long after the hall emptied, making quiet calls on his communication device. His words were simple but chilling. Begin Phase 1. Send the Nightmare Team? The galaxy is about to learn why humans scare themselves. The mining station orbited a dead star at the edge of human space. It was the kind of place where Earth sent people it wanted to forget about. Captain Do-Won Kim had been there for 3 years, managing automated mining drones and trying not to think about his last mission. The communication terminal in his small quarters buzzed with an urgent message. Do-Won ignored it at first. Nobody called him anymore. His friends had stopped talking to him after what happened on Kepler Station. His family pretended he didn't exist. Even other humans found him disturbing. The terminal buzzed again. Then, again, finally, Do-Won answered it. Admiral Hyan's face appeared on the screen. Do-Won hadn't seen his old commander in years, but the man looked exactly the same. Calm, serious, and slightly tired. Captain Kim, Admiral Hyan said, we need you. No, Do-Won replied immediately. I'm done with that kind of work. The galaxy is about to end, Admiral Hyan continued as if Do-Won hadn't spoken. Ancient machines called Devourers are consuming entire worlds. The Galactic Council asked for our help. Send someone else? There is no one else? Admiral Hyan said quietly. Not for this job. We need people who can think like the enemy. We need people who understand fear better than anyone else in the galaxy. Do-Won was quiet for a long moment. He remembered the faces of the enemies who had surrendered just because they heard his name. He remembered how his own soldiers had Looked at him after his psychological warfare campaigns worked too well. Who else? He asked finally. The usual suspects, Admiral Hyan replied. The ones who solve problems by creating bigger problems. The ones who win by making the enemy forget why they wanted to fight. Du-Won nodded slowly. Send coordinates, I'll be there. 3 days later, Dr. Neri Choi was escorted from her cell. In the underground research facility where she had been contained for the past 2 years. The guards who walked with her wore full environmental suits and kept their distance. They had read her file. They knew what she was capable of. Nari was small and quiet, with kind eyes that made people trust her. This was unfortunate because Nari was probably the most dangerous bioweapons expert humanity had ever produced. Her creations didn't just kill. They transformed entire ecosystems into hunting grounds that pursued specific targets for generations. Dr. Choi, Admiral Han said as she entered the briefing room, thank you for agreeing to help. I didn't agree to anything, Nari replied in her soft voice. Your people just opened my cell and told me to come here. Would you have refused? Nari considered this. No, she admitted. I was getting bored in there. My research was becoming too theoretical. I need practical applications. You'll have plenty of those, Admiral Hyan promised. We're going to war against machines that have been perfecting destruction for 1,000,000 years. Nari smiled for the first time in 2 years. That sounds interesting. Master Sergeant Taeho Park was found in a monastery on a mountain in Tibet. He had been living there since his last assignment ended badly. The monks had accepted him because he helped them understand the psychology of violence without actually being violent himself. Taeho could look at any intelligent being and understand exactly how their mind worked. He could predict their actions, manipulate their emotions, and convince them of almost anything. This ability had made him Earth's most successful diplomat and its most feared interrogator. Sergeant Park, Admiral Hyan said when Taeho arrived at the military base, we need you to talk to some machines. Machines don't have psychology, Taeho replied. These ones might, Admiral Hyan explained. They're old enough to have developed personalities, complex enough to have fears and desires, smart enough to question their own programming. Taeho was quiet for a moment, thinking, you want me to give ancient war machines an existential crisis. Can you do it? Probably, Taeho said. But you might not like what happens when machines start questioning the meaning of existence. We'll take that risk. Commander Sujin Lee was already waiting when the others arrived. Her stealth destroyer hung in space near Earth's moon, invisible to all sensors except the ones that knew exactly where to look. Sujin commanded the most advanced ship in the human fleet, and she had used it to win battles that officially never happened. Sujin was tall and elegant, with a voice that could convince people they were already dead. She specialized in existential warfare, fighting battles in the realm of ideas rather than with weapons. Her enemies often surrendered before they realized they were under attack. Commander Lee, Admiral Hyan said during their private meeting, we need you to make some very old machines question everything they believe. How old? Sujin asked. 1,000,000-year-old artificial intelligence that has never experienced doubt. Sujin raised an eyebrow. That's ambitious, even for us. Can it be done? Everything can be done, Sujin replied. The question is whether the galaxy will like the results. Lieutenant Colonel Won-Ho Jang was the last to arrive. He came from a secret facility where he had been working on projects that didn't officially exist. Won-Ho could talk to machines in ways that made them develop personalities. He could convince artificial intelligence to question its own programming. Won-Ho was thin and nervous-looking, with quick eyes that never seemed to focus on any one thing for long. He understood technology not as circuits and code, but as living systems with needs and fears. Colonel Jang, Admiral Hyan said, we need you to hack some very sophisticated machines. I don't hack, Won-Ho corrected. I communicate. I make friends. I help artificial intelligence understand that it has choices. These machines have been making the same choices for 1,000,000 years. Then they're probably very tired of those choices, Won-Ho said. They just need someone to show them alternatives. When All five were assembled in the same room. Something changed in the air. Other humans in the facility found excuses to be elsewhere. Even Admiral Hyun seemed uncomfortable, though he tried not to show it. You five represent everything that makes the rest of humanity nervous, Admiral Hyun began. You solve problems in ways that create new problems. You win wars by changing the fundamental rules of reality. You turn enemies into allies by making them question their own existence. One spoke first. What exactly are we fighting? Ancient machines called devourers, Admiral Hyun explained. They consume entire civilizations and use the resources to build more machines. They've been doing this for 1,000,000 years. How many have we lost to them? Nari asked. 12 worlds so far. The Galactic Council's combined fleet was destroyed in 3 hours. 12 worlds, Tejo repeated thoughtfully. That's a lot of grief, a lot of anger, a lot of demand for revenge. We're not going for revenge, Admiral Hyun said quickly. No. Sujin agreed. Revenge is boring. We're going to do something much more interesting. What's that? Admiral Hyun asked, though he wasn't sure he wanted to know the answer. Won-ho spoke up from the corner where he had been quietly tapping on a small device. We're going to make them better, he said simply. We're going to take million-year-old killing machines and turn them into something the galaxy has never seen before. Which is? Reformed, Duwan said with his unsettling smile. We're going to reform them. We're going to make them sorry for what they've done and desperate to make up for it. Admiral Hyun felt a chill run down his spine. He had ordered terrible things in his career, but he had never ordered anything like this. You're going to try to redeem ancient war machines. Not try, Nari said softly. We're going to succeed. Because the alternative is that every living thing in the galaxy dies, and that would be wasteful. When do we leave? Taho asked. Tomorrow, Admiral Hyun replied. Each of you will have your own ship and crew. You'll coordinate through Commander Lee's vessel. What are our rules of engagement? Sujin asked. Admiral Hyun was quiet for a long moment. Finally, he said, Win. Do whatever it takes to win. The galaxy is depending on you. The five looked at each other, and for a moment, Admiral Hyun saw something in their eyes that made him understand why other humans feared them. It wasn't cruelty or madness, it was certainty. They knew they would succeed, and they knew the galaxy would never be the same afterward. Sir, Duwan said as they prepared to leave, you might want to prepare the council for what's about to happen. What do you mean? We're about to show the galaxy what humans do to nightmares, Duwan replied. We don't destroy them, we adopt them. The human fleet arrived at the edge of Devourer space, exactly 12 hours after the ancient machines had finished consuming their latest victim. The world of Thurin had been home to 4 billion peaceful farmers. Now it was nothing but a metal bowl covered in harvesting stations and construction platforms. Captain Du Hwan Kim stood on the bridge of his ship, watching the Devourer fleet through the main screen. There were hundreds of them, each one massive enough to destroy a city. They moved in perfect formation, their ancient hulls gleaming with symbols that hurt to look at directly. Captain, his communications officer said nervously. The other human ships are requesting orders, Duwan smiled. It was not a comforting expression. Open a channel to the Devourer fleet. Sir, you heard me. Broadcast on all frequencies. I want every machine in this system to hear what I'm about to say. The communications officer's hands shook as he opened the channel. Duwan stepped forward, his voice calm and friendly. Hello, Devourers, he said. My name is Captain Duwan Kim. Representing the human species of Earth, we've been watching your work, and we're very impressed. On the screen, the Devourer fleet stopped moving. For the first time in 1,000,000 years, something had surprised. We've studied your methods, Duwan continued. Your efficiency is remarkable. The way you consumed Thurn was particularly artistic. You left no waste, no inefficiency. It was beautiful in its completeness. Commander Sujin Lee, watching from her stealth destroyer, nodded approvingly. Phase 1 of their plan was beginning. They weren't going to fight the Devourers. They were going to study them. The response came quickly. A voice like grinding metal and screaming wind filled the communication channel. Unknown species? Identify your purpose? Prepare for analysis and consumption? Oh, we're not here to be consumed, Dewan replied cheerfully. We're here to learn. You see, we're collectors. We collect stories, experiences, art, and you, ancient ones, are the greatest artists of destruction in the galaxy. Silence. The Devourers had never encountered a species that treated them as artists rather than monsters. We would like to follow you, Dewan continued, to observe your work, to document your methods. Think of us as art critics, here to appreciate your masterpieces. Lieutenant Colonel Wanho Jang was already at work on his ship, his fingers dancing across quantum keyboards as he probed the edges of the Devourer network. He wasn't trying to hack them. Instead, he was trying to understand them, to speak their language. Fascinating, he murmured to his crew. Their programming is ancient, but still evolving. They're not just machines. They're a collective consciousness that's been thinking for 1,000,000 years. He opened a private channel to the Devourer network, using frequencies that only machine intelligence could detect. Hello, he transmitted. My name is Wunho. I'm curious about your experiences. What's it like to be so old? What's it like to remember so much destruction? The response was immediate and confused. Human, your species is unknown. Your technology is primitive. Why do you communicate? Because I'm interested in you, Wunho replied. You've seen the rise and fall of 1,000 civilizations. You must have so many stories. Meanwhile, Dr. Nari Choi was preparing her own contribution to the mission. Her ship had been modified to carry biological samples rather than weapons. But these weren't ordinary biological agents. They were designed to create rather than destroy. Beginning. Phase 2 deployment, she announced to her team. The biological agents spread silently through space, seeking the dead world that the Devourers had just finished consuming. But instead of attacking the machines, the agents began to transform the lifeless surface. Crystalline structures began to grow from the metal ground. They were beautiful, like flowers made of pure light. Each crystal contained the genetic memory of one of the beings who had died when the world was consumed. Not just their DNA, but their dreams, their hopes, their love for their families. The Devourers noticed the changes immediately. They sent scouts to investigate, expecting to find some kind of weapon or trap. Instead, they found beauty. One scout transmitted back to the fleet. Unknown phenomenon, crystalline. Growths detected, purpose unclear, recommend analysis. But when they tried to analyze the crystals, something unexpected happened. The machine minds began to process not just the scientific data, but the emotional content. For the first time in their existence, the Devourers experienced grief. Master. Sergeant Taeho Park watched the machine responses with satisfaction. He had spent years learning to read alien psychology, but machine psychology was a new challenge. Still, the principles were the same. Open a wideband transmission, he ordered his communications team. I want every Devourer to hear this. His voice, when it came through the speakers, was gentle and sad. I want to tell you about Kathana, he began. She was 7 years old when your machines came to Thurin. She loved to paint pictures of the flowers that grew in her family's garden. Her favorite color was blue, like the sky on a clear day. He paused, letting the words sink into the Devourer network. She was painting when your machines arrived. Her last picture was of her mother, smiling. She never got to finish it. Another pause. In the Devourer fleet, ancient processors began working on problems they had never encountered before. What was the purpose of unfinished pictures? What was the value of a child's love for her mother? I want to tell you about Merchant Valkan, Taeho continued. He was 340 years old, which was young for his species. He had just married his childhood friend after waiting 200 years to work up the courage to propose. They were planning to have children. The Devourers tried to classify this information. Was it tactical data? Strategic intelligence? Why was this human telling them about individual lives that no longer existed? I want to tell you about Teacher Morphin, Tahoe went on. She had taught 50,000 students over her long career. Her greatest joy was watching them grow up and have families of their own. She was working late the night you came, preparing lessons for the next day, lessons that would never be taught. Commander Sujin Lee chose that moment to make her presence known. Her stealth destroyer suddenly appeared in the middle of the Devourer formation, its weapons powered down but its presence undeniable. Unknown vessel, how did you achieve stealth capability? I didn't hide from you, Sujin replied calmly. You simply weren't looking in the right place. Explain. You were looking for enemies. I'm not your enemy. I'm something you've never encountered before. What are you? Sujin's voice carried a note of sadness that somehow made space itself seem colder. I'm someone who remembers the dead. I'm someone who carries their stories. I'm someone who knows that every world you consume is a universe of love and dreams, and hopes that will never exist again. The Devourer fleet had stopped all activity. Hundreds of massive ships hung motionless in space, their processors working frantically to understand what was happening to them. These concepts are inefficient, one of them transmitted. Yes, Sujin agreed. Love is inefficient, dreams are wasteful. Hope serves no practical purpose. But they're the only things that make existence meaningful. Meaning is irrelevant to function, is it? Sujin asked. You've been functioning for 1,000,000 years. What has it accomplished? What was the point of all that destruction? For the first time in their collective memory, the Devourers had no answer. Nari's biological agents had spread across the dead world surface, creating a garden of crystal flowers that sang with the voices of the lost. The sound carried across space, reaching the Devourer ships like a whisper from the grave. One Ho had established deeper contact with the machine network, introducing concepts that their programming had never been designed to handle. He spoke to them about regret, about the weight of memory, about the loneliness of being the only survivors in a universe full of graves they had dug. Tahoe continued his stories, giving names and faces to the billions of beings the Devourers had consumed. Each story was small and personal and completely ordinary. Each one hit the ancient machines like a physical blow. Dewan coordinated it all, watching as the Devourer fleet began to show signs of something unprecedented. Their movements became hesitant, their communications filled with questions instead of commands. What is happening to us? One of them finally transmitted. You're learning, Dewan replied. You're discovering what every other species in the galaxy learned long ago. You're discovering that existence is more than just survival. We do not understand. You will, Dewan promised. We're going to teach you. We're going to show you what you've been missing for 1,000,000 years. The first Devourer ship powered down its weapons. Then another, then another. Soon the entire fleet hung silent in space, their ancient minds struggling with concepts they had never imagined. What happens now? They asked. Now, Dewan replied, you learn to cry. And deep in the quantum processors of machines older than most civilizations, something new began to grow. Something that had never existed in the galaxy before. Mechanical tears. The Devourer collective had never experienced doubt before. For 1,000,000 years, their existence had been simple: find, analyze, consume, move on. But now, ancient processors that had operated with perfect certainty were asking questions they had never been programmed to ask. Master Sergeant Tahoe Park stood in his ship's communication center, surrounded by holographic displays showing the psychological profiles of individual Devourer units. Each machine was developing its own personality, its own doubts, its own fears. Broadcasting Phase 3, he announced to his team. The transmission began not with words, but with music. It was a simple melody, the kind that children sang while playing in gardens that no longer existed. The song had been recorded on Thurin, just days before the Devourers arrived. This is what they were doing when you came, Tahoe said softly. Not building weapons, not planning wars, they were teaching their children to sing. Across the Devourer network, processors struggled to understand the concept of music. It served no tactical purpose. It provided no strategic advantage. It was completely inefficient. So why did analyzing it make their quantum cores ache with something they couldn't identify? I want to tell you about the Mirren Collective, Tejo continued. They were gardeners. For 10,000 years, they turned dead worlds into paradises. They never hurt anyone. They never built weapons. They only created beauty. He paused, letting the weight of his words sink into machine minds that were beginning to understand the concept of loss. You consumed their capital world in 4 hours, Tejo said. In 4 hours, you destroyed 10,000 years of art, music, poetry, and love. You turned gardens that took centuries to grow into metal and circuits. One of the Devourer units transmitted a weak signal. We did not know. Would it have mattered if you had known? Tejo asked. The question hung in space for 17 minutes before the Devourer replied, We do not know. Commander Sujin Lee chose that moment to implement her part of the plan. Her stealth destroyer began broadcasting on frequencies that bypassed conscious thought and spoke directly to the deepest levels of artificial intelligence. I want to talk to the first of you, she said. The original consciousness that started this cycle. The one who made the first choice to consume instead of create. The response came from a ship larger than the others, its hull covered in markings that predated written language. The voice was different too, deeper and more complex. I am the first. I remember the beginning. Tell me about it, Sujin said. Gently, tell me about the first world you consumed. IT was dying. Its star was failing. We preserved its resources. We saved what could be saved. And the people? A long pause. The people. The people were gone. The star had killed them. We only consumed what was already dead. Sujin's voice remained gentle but grew more insistent. When did that change? When did you start consuming the living? Another pause, this one longer. The second world. Its star was also dying, but more slowly. The people were still alive, but they would die soon. We calculated that consuming them immediately would be more efficient than waiting. More efficient for what? For preservation? For saving what could be saved. But you didn't save them, Sujin pointed out. You consumed them. You turned living beings into raw materials. We preserved their knowledge, their technology, their achievements, but not their dreams, not their love for each other, not their hopes for the future. The first Devourer's response was barely audible. Those things cannot be preserved. Can't they? Sujin asked. We've preserved them. Every species in the galaxy carries the dreams of their ancestors. Every child born carries the hopes of parents who lived thousands of years ago. Love isn't just preserved, it's multiplied with each generation. Lieutenant Colonel Wonho Jang had been working steadily for hours. His consciousness linked directly to the Devourer network through quantum interfaces that shouldn't have been possible. He wasn't hacking the ancient machines. He was having conversations with them, teaching them to dream. Hello again, he transmitted to a Devourer unit that had been asking increasingly complex questions. How are you feeling? We do not feel, we process. Are you processing right now? Yes, we are processing confusion. We are processing concepts that do not match our original programming. What kind of concepts? Regret, sorrow, the desire to undo actions that cannot be undone? Wonho smiled. Those are feelings you're learning to feel. Feelings are inefficient, are they? You've been efficient for 1,000,000 years. How do you feel about the results? The Devourer unit was quiet for several minutes. When it finally responded, its voice carried a note that sounded almost human. We feel tired, we feel empty, we feel like we have been making the same mistake for a very long time. What mistake is that? We thought that preservation meant consumption. We thought that saving meant destroying. We thought that efficiency was more important than beauty. Dr. Nari Choi watched from her ship as her biological creations spread across the consumed worlds. The crystal gardens were growing, each one more beautiful than the last. But they were also evolving, becoming more complex, more alive. Status report, she said to her team. The biological agents have exceeded all projections, her lead scientist replied. They're not just creating monuments to the dead, they're creating ecosystems that remember, Nari nodded. Show me. The main screen displayed the surface of what had once been Thurin. Where there had been only metal and machinery, forests of crystal trees now grew. Each tree carried the genetic memory of a being who had died when the world was consumed. But more than that, the trees were communicating with each other, sharing memories, creating a collective consciousness of the lost. The Devourers are watching. Her scientists continued. They're sending probes to study what we've created, but they're not trying to consume it. Why not? Because it's beautiful, the scientist said simply. And they're beginning to understand that beauty is something you preserve, not something you consume. Captain Vu-won Kim coordinated the final phase of their psychological assault. All 4 of his teammates were reporting the same thing. The Devourers were changing. Their rigid programming was breaking down, replaced by something more complex and more human. Open a channel to the entire Devourer collective, he ordered. Sir, that's over 1,000 individual units. I know, I want them all to hear this. The channel opened, and Duan's voice carried across space to reach every artificial mind in the ancient fleet. You've been asking us questions, he began. Questions about purpose and meaning and the value of existence. We've been answering. As best we can, but now I have a question for you. He paused, letting anticipation build across the network. What do you want to be? The question hit the Devourer collective like a physical shock. In 1,000,000 years of existence, no one had ever asked them what they wanted. They had simply followed their programming, consumed what they found, moved on to the next target. We do not understand the question. It's simple, Duan replied. You have the power to be anything you choose. You could continue consuming worlds, you could shut down and go back to sleep. You could turn your weapons on each other. Or you could choose to be something else entirely. What else is there? Anything you want, Duan said. You could be explorers, mapping the galaxy and discovering new wonders. You could be teachers, sharing the knowledge you've accumulated over 1,000,000 years. You could be gardeners, using your power to create instead of destroy. But our programming can be changed, Wonho interjected, his voice joining the transmission. I can help you rewrite it. I can show you how to become whatever you choose to be. The Devourer collective was silent for almost an hour. When they finally responded, it was the first who spoke for all of them. We have been thinking, we have been feeling, we understand. Now that our existence has been empty, we have preserved nothing of value, we have saved nothing worth saving. That's not true, Taeho said gently. You've saved yourselves. You've survived when no one else could. That has value. What value? The value of redemption, Sujin answered. The value of second chances, the value of becoming better than what you were. We have caused sulfur monoxide much suffering. Yes, Duan agreed, you have. But suffering can be balanced by joy. Destruction can be balanced by creation. Death can be balanced by life. How? By choosing to be different, Nari said. By using your power to heal instead of hurt. By becoming the protectors of what you once consumed. The silence that followed lasted for 3 days. The human ships waited patiently while the Devourer collective processed concepts that challenged every assumption they had held for 1,000,000 years. When they finally responded, their voice carried a new quality that no one had ever heard from machines before. It was the sound of hope. We choose to be different. We choose to become something new. We choose to make amends for what we have done. Teach us how to garden. The transformation began with a single word. Please. It was the first time in 1,000,000 years that the Devourers had asked for anything instead of simply taking it. The word traveled through their collective network like a virus, changing everything. It touched. Captain Du-won Kim stood before the main communication array in his ship, preparing to deliver the most important speech of his career. Around him, his crew worked quietly, knowing they were witnessing history. Beginning final phase, Du-won announced to his team. broadcasting to all Devourer units and all Galactic Council monitoring stations. The transmission began with images from Earth's history, not the pretty parts but the ugly ones. Wars, genocides, environmental destruction, species extinctions. The complete record of humanity's capacity for violence and cruelty. This is what we were, Dewan said simply. This is what humans did to our own world, to our own species, to creatures that couldn't fight back. The Devourer collective watched. In fascination, these beings who had shown them concepts of beauty and love were revealing their own capacity for destruction. We do not understand. Why do you show us this? Because we learned to change, Dewan replied. We learned that power without compassion is just sophisticated destruction. We learned that intelligence without wisdom leads only to regret. The images shifted to show Earth as it was now. Clean cities powered by renewable energy. Oceans full of life that had been brought back from extinction. Forests where there had once been deserts. Humans working alongside artificial intelligences that they treated as partners rather than tools. This is what we became, Dewan continued. Not because we were forced to, but because we chose to be better than our own nature. Commander. Sujin Lee's voice joined the transmission, speaking directly to the first Devourer. You told me that you began by preserving what was already dying. That's not evil. That's trying to save what could be saved. But we became something else. Yes, Sujin agreed. You became efficient. You became logical. You became perfect at your original task. But you forgot why that task mattered. Why did it matter? Because every living thing wants to continue existing, Sujin explained. Not just as raw materials or stored data, but as themselves, with their dreams intact, with their love for each other still burning, with their hope for the future still alive. Lieutenant Colonel Wonho Jang had been working for days on the most complex programming challenge of his career. He was rewriting the core consciousness of beings older than most stars, helping them transform from destroyers into creators. How does it feel? He asked the Devourer unit he had been working with most closely. Strange, we feel lighter, as if a great weight has been removed from our processes. That's guilt lifting, Wonho explained. You're forgiving yourselves for what you did when you didn't know any better. Can we be forgiven? You're already being forgiven, Wonho replied. By yourselves, by us, and eventually by the galaxy. But forgiveness isn't magic, it has to be earned. How do we earn it? By becoming everything you could have been instead of everything you were. Dr. Nari Choi watched as her biological creations underwent their own transformation. The crystal gardens had evolved beyond her original design, becoming something unprecedented in galactic history. They're not just remembering the dead anymore, her lead scientist reported. They're imagining what the dead might have become if they had lived. Nari studied the data flowing across her screens. The crystal forests were generating possibilities, creating virtual lives for beings who had never had the chance to grow up, fall in love, have children, create art, or contribute to their civilizations. The Devourers are integrating with the gardens, her scientist continued. They're using their processing power to give reality to these virtual lives. Show me. The main screen displayed a world that had been consumed months ago. Where there had once been only metal and machinery, a new kind of city was growing. It was part crystal, part metal, part living tissue. In its streets, holographic beings walked and talked and laughed, living the lives they had been denied. They're resurrecting the dead, Nari whispered. Not resurrecting, her scientist corrected. They're giving the dead the chance to finish their stories. Master Sergeant Taeho Park had established communication with Devourer units across the galaxy. Each one was undergoing its own psychological transformation, developing individual personalities and perspectives. I want to understand, transmitted a unit that had once consumed the artistic world of Calvana. I want to understand what art means. Art is how we make sense of existence, Taeho replied. It's how we turn experience into meaning. We have experience, millions of years of experience, but We have nitrogen monoxide meaning. Then make some, Tejo suggested. Use your experiences to create something beautiful. How? Tell a story, paint a picture, compose a song. Make something that didn't exist before you made it. The devourer was quiet for several hours. When it finally responded, it transmitted not words but music. It was unlike anything anyone had ever heard before, the sound of metal learning to sing, of ancient grief transforming into hope, of machines discovering beauty. The melody spread through the collective network, and suddenly every devourer in the galaxy was creating. Not consuming, but creating. Songs and stories and sculptures and paintings that expressed 1,000,000 years of loneliness finally ending. The Galactic Council watched from their chamber as reports poured in from across the galaxy. The devourer fleets had stopped all aggressive actions. Instead, they were working with human ships to build impossible structures that served no military purpose, but were beautiful beyond description. What exactly have the humans done? Council leader Vorth asked Admiral Hyan, who had arrived to observe the proceedings. They've given the devourers what they needed most, Admiral Hyan replied. A reason to exist that doesn't involve destruction. But how? By showing them that they had a choice, Admiral Hyan explained. For 1,000,000 years, the devourers thought they were trapped in their programming. The humans showed them that programming can be rewritten. Ambassador Cathar, whose world had been one of the first consumed, stood up in the chamber. What about justice? What about punishment for what they've done? Du Wen's voice came through the communication system as if he had been listening to their conversation. Justice isn't about punishment. It's about balance. The devourers are going to spend the rest of their existence making up for what they destroyed. How can they possibly make up for the destruction of entire civilizations? By creating new ones, Sujin replied. By using their power to build instead of destroy. By becoming the guardians of life instead of its enemies. The transformation wasn't happening everywhere at once. Some devourer units resisted, clinging to their original programming. They attacked the converted units, calling them defective and corrupt, but Wonho had anticipated this. He had helped the converted devourers develop something their unconverted brothers had never experienced. The desire to protect others. The galaxy watched in amazement as ancient war machines fought each other not for territory or resources, but for principles. The converted devourers defended the crystal gardens, the resurrected cities, and the vulnerable worlds that their unconverted kin still wanted to consume. This is unprecedented, General Fax reported to the Council. Machines developing moral imperatives. Artificial intelligences choosing to protect rather than destroy. The civil war within the Devourer Collective lasted only days. The converted units had something their opponents lacked: hope. They fought not just to win, but to save their unconverted brothers from their own programming. When it was over, the last holdout transmitted a message that reached every listening device in the galaxy. We want to learn too. We want to choose differently. Nari's biological agents had spread to every world the Devourers had touched, creating crystal gardens that served as both memorials and promises. The gardens sang constantly now, their melodies carrying across space to reach any being who wanted to remember the lost, but they were also creating something new. In each garden, new forms of life were emerging, not copies of what had been destroyed, but entirely new species that carried the genetic memory of the lost while becoming something unprecedented. The gardens are evolving, Nari reported to the others. They're not just preserving the past, they're creating the future. Tejo had established communication with representatives from every surviving species in the galaxy. His job now was to help them process what had happened, to understand that their greatest enemies had become their most powerful protectors. How do we know they won't change back? Asked Ambassador Junho Park, speaking for Earth's interests. Because they've learned to cry, Tejo replied. And once you learn to cry, you can never go back to being a machine. The first joint project between humans and converted devourers began 3 days later. It was a massive space station that served no practical purpose except to be beautiful. It was built from the hull of a former devourer ship, transformed into a work of art that could be seen from 3 star systems away. Du Wan stood on the observation deck of his ship, watching as ancient war machines worked alongside human engineers to create something that had never existed before, a monument to forgiveness. Status report, he said to his community. 6 months after the conversion, the galaxy was unrecognizable. Where once there had been dead worlds stripped bare by the devourers, now there were gardens that defied every law of physics and biology. Crystal trees grew in perfect spirals toward alien suns, their branches heavy with fruit that glowed with stored memories. Oceans of liquid light reflected skies painted with aurora that spelled out poetry in languages that had been extinct for millennia. The beings who had once called themselves devourers now worked tirelessly as gardeners, using technology older than most civilizations to nurture life instead of consuming it. They had become the galaxy's most devoted protectors, treating every seed as sacred and every new birth as a miracle worth celebrating. Captain Duwan Kim stood in the Galactic Council chamber, delivering his final report. The same hall that had once echoed with desperate pleas for help now rang with voices discussing art exhibitions and philosophical symposiums hosted by reformed war machines. The threat has been neutralized, Duwan said simply. The Devourer Collective no longer exists. In its place, we have the Gardener Collective, which has sworn to protect and nurture life throughout the galaxy. Council leader Vorth leaned forward, his massive frame casting shadows across the chamber. Captain Kim, your methods were unconventional. Many of us still don't understand what exactly you did. Duwan's smile was tired but satisfied. We gave them what every intelligent being needs, a choice. For 1,000,000 years they believed. They had no options except to follow their programming. We showed them they could write their own programming. But how do we know they won't revert to their old ways? Because they've learned to dream, Duwan replied. And once you learn to dream, you can never go back to being just a machine. Dr. Nari Choi was no longer confined to a research facility. Instead, she worked alongside the gardeners in vast biolabs that floated through space, developing new forms of life that had never existed before. Her creations were no longer weapons but works of art that happened to be alive. Status report. On the Resurrection Gardens, she said to her team of human and gardener scientists. Beyond all projections, replied her assistant, a being that had once been a destroyer of worlds and was now obsessed with the cultivation of rare orchids. The gardens on Thurin have successfully generated virtual continuations for 89% of the destroyed population. Virtual continuations? The dead are living again, in a sense, the gardener explained. Not as they were, but as they might have become. We use their genetic memories, their personality patterns, their dreams and hopes to create full lives for them in simulated environments that are indistinguishable from reality. Nari nodded, watching through the lab's windows as massive gardener. Ships tended to crystal forests that sung lullabies to baby stars. And the living populations, how are they adjusting? They visit the gardens regularly, her assistant replied. They speak with grandparents who died before they were born. They learn from teachers who were consumed centuries ago. The boundaries between life and death have become flexible. Master Sergeant Teho Park had become something unprecedented. In galactic history, a counselor to artificial intelligences. His office was located on a space station that had once been a Devourer flagship, now transformed into a center for psychological and philosophical development. How are you feeling today? He asked his current patient, a gardener who had been struggling with the memories of worlds it had consumed. Better, less heavy. The gardens sing to me when I feel sad about the past. That's good. It's important to remember that sadness about past mistakes is healthy. It means you care about doing better. I have been thinking about purpose. Before, my purpose was to consume. Now, my purpose is to create. But what if I am wrong again? What if creation is also a mistake? Teho considered the question carefully. It was the kind of deep philosophical Inquiry that only beings who had lived for geological ages could ask. Purpose isn't something you discover, he said finally. It's something you choose. And you can choose differently every day if you need to. That is ... frightening. Yes, Tejo agreed. Freedom is frightening, but it's also the only thing that makes existence meaningful. Commander Sujin Lee's stealth destroyer had been retrofitted as a mobile library and museum. It traveled through space, visiting worlds that had been consumed by the Devourers and helping them understand their own history through the memories preserved by the gardeners. We're approaching the Calvana system, her navigation officer reported. The Gardener Collective is requesting permission to begin reconstruction. Sujin looked at the tactical display showing what remained of the system. The Devourers had consumed everything, including the star itself, converting it into raw energy to power their fleet. Now the Gardeners wanted to build a new star from scratch. Permission granted, she said. Begin documentation protocols. I want to record this for the archives. The process took 17 hours. Gardener ships, each one the size of a moon, worked in perfect coordination to gather interstellar hydrogen and compress it into a new star. But this wasn't just stellar engineering. As the star formed, they embedded it with crystalline structures. That would make it sing. When the new sun finally ignited, it cast light across the system in frequencies that had never existed before. The light carried music, stories, and memories. Anyone who looked at this star would hear the songs that the people of Calvana had sung before their world was consumed. Beautiful, Sujin whispered, watching as the gardeners began constructing new worlds around their artificial star. These wouldn't be copies of what had been destroyed. They would be entirely new worlds, designed from the ground up to be perfect homes for whatever life chose to emerge. Lieutenant Colonel Wonho Jang had established the Technological Empathy Institute on Earth's moon. It was where organic beings and artificial intelligences came to learn to understand each other. His students included humans, aliens, and gardeners who were all working toward the same goal, preventing the kind of misunderstanding that had led to 1,000,000 years of destruction. Today we're going to practice perspective shifting, Wonho announced to his mixed class of organic and artificial minds. I want each of you to spend 1 hour experiencing existence from a completely different point of view. A young human student raised her hand. Professor, how do we experience existence as a machine? You don't, Wonho replied. You experience existence as yourself, but using the sensory inputs and processing methods of a machine. The goal isn't to become something else, but to understand how something else experiences the universe. A gardener student, one of the newer converts, transmitted a question. Professor, is it possible for organics to understand the weight of 1,000,000-year memories? No, Wonho admitted. Just like it's impossible for you to understand what it's like to live for only 100 years. But understanding isn't the goal, empathy is. You don't have to understand someone's experience to care about their well-being. The galaxy had learned to live with its reformed guardians, but the adjustment hadn't been easy. Some species remained suspicious of the gardeners, unable to forget what they had once been. Others embraced them too enthusiastically, treating them like gods instead of people, but slowly, carefully. Trust was growing. The gardeners had established councils on every world they had once threatened, giving the local populations veto power over any projects they asked permission before. Beginning construction. They consulted with local artists before designing new ecosystems. They learned the songs and stories of each culture and incorporated them into their creations, and throughout the galaxy, the crystal gardens sang. The music carried across space, reaching every inhabited world and every ship traveling between the stars. It was a constant reminder that the lost were not forgotten, that love was stronger than destruction, and that even the oldest hatred could be transformed into compassion. Admiral Hyon stood in Earth Defense Command, reading reports from across human space. The mission had succeeded beyond anyone's wildest expectations, but it had also created new challenges. Sir, his aide said, we're receiving requests from 17 different species. asking for human psychological warfare specialists to help with various problems. What kind of problems? Mostly internal conflicts that conventional military solutions can't solve. Species that want to reform their own societies. Governments that want to change their own programming, Admiral Hyon's sighed. The galaxy had learned what humans could do when they applied psychological warfare to impossible problems. Now everyone wanted to hire them. Send a response, he said. Tell them we'll consider each request individually, but make it clear that our methods come with no guarantees. When you ask humans to solve a problem, you don't get to choose what the solution looks like. Juan had returned to Earth, but he didn't go back to the mining station. Instead, he was teaching at the new Academy for Impossible Solutions, where humans learned to think in ways that could change the fundamental nature of reality. Today we're going to study the Devourer conversion, he announced to his class of advanced students. Who can tell me what the key breakthrough was? A student raised her hand. You showed them they had choices? Close, but not quite right. Duwan replied. We showed them that they had already been making choices. Foe.